It's pretty amazing to me when you think about all the aspects of leadership that are, for lack of a better word, evolving. Now, I know that leadership has always been an evolving aspect because, well, it involves humans, and humans are constantly in a state of transition. They're constantly changing. We change the way that we look at the world, we change the way that we teach, we change the way that we communicate with each other from stone tablets to digital devices. That constant evolution also means, though, that the applications of life, the relationships that we embark on, the way that we treat each other evolves as well. The level of respect that we have for one another has changed, and I'm not convinced that it's for the better. I remember a day when everyone would address someone who's maybe just a little older than them, even if it's only a couple of years or a couple of months, as yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. Now, some might say that that's antiquated, some might say it's old fashioned, it's no longer relevant. But I wonder if what went with that everyday common courtesy was respect. Did we somehow lose the ability to respect one another, to respect someone with more education, to respect someone who's been at the job longer, to respect someone who's a little longer in the tooth? Have we lost the ability to do that? I was watching a news clip the other night of a young man, probably mid to late 20s, just based on his size and facial features and behavior. But he felt it was appropriate to stand outside of an eating establishment and urinate on a cop car, and then come inside the building and actually swing at two local city police officers while in uniform and on the job. Now, I don't know what was going through his head that made him feel like that was an appropriate thing to do. For anyone who automatically has an assumption in their head, it was a white kid and two white cops. So it's not a racial issue, it's a stupidity issue. But that level of disrespect, that level of dishonor for men who are on the job in law enforcement doesn't stop there. We have employer-employee relationships who operate with that kind of disdain. We have parenting relationships that operate with that kind of disdain. We have husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend relationships that operate with that kind of disdain. And what I mean by that is that the level of honor for another human being, the level of respect for another human being has been diminished so much because we've been divided as humans into these categories, male and female and something other than male or female, transgender or gender fluid, where it doesn't really matter if they're male or female, or if you're male or female, or how you practice your sexuality. We just want to blur the lines between all of them and then divide among them. That division isn't a good thing. That division that classes and pits one group of people against another is not a good thing for humanity overall. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. That level of disdain has caused men to look at their wives, their girlfriends, their sisters in a different way. It's caused women to look at their husbands, their boyfriends, their brothers in a different way. And that change, that shift in the value of humanity all across the board is also a leadership problem. Now, in just the last year or so, we've seen people from what we would consider very high statures lose their positions, lose their leadership role, lose their level of influence, specifically related to how they treat people of the opposite sex. Now, it does, in my opinion, seem to be a double standard. At the same time that men are losing their jobs over things they may have said, things they may have done, and I'm not by any means defending anything that they've said or done. I am saying that sometimes those things are misconstrued. And at the same time that that's happening, we have sitcoms right now who are mocking the role reversal, where it's now the female in the sitcom who's speaking in a sexual way or behaving in a sexual way, even making physical contact in a sexual way in the opposite direction. Now, if it wasn't right for men to do it, and I agree it's not, then it's not right for women to do it either. And it doesn't matter where your sexual fluidity lands. if touching another person or speaking to another person with a sexual overtone is inappropriate for a man than it is for a woman, than it is for a transgender, than it is for, do you follow me? If the concept is wrong, if the principle is wrong, there's no one who's excluded from being wrong when they do it. But that's just a small sampling of the type of things that we see where the disdain for human nature, the disdain for humanity, has been elevated so high that leaders are being targeted from one side and the same behavior is being applauded on the other. I was talking to a gentleman just yesterday who spent all of his years in the background of what you would call big oil. Worked for several different companies. A couple of them, he rose pretty high in the organization, and a couple of them were global names, like a BP, Exxon, or Mobil, something like that. Big names. And as we were chatting, we both lamented the fact that just like BP with the oil spill that happened in the Gulf Coast of the United States, and so many thousands and thousands of lives ruined, financially ruined, the tourism industry destroyed, businesses wiped out, homes destroyed, lives destroyed. And that's not even to count the damage to the sea life that was created by the oil spill that was BP. I don't know that BP could have done a whole lot more to stem the problem. I don't know what they could have done to prevent the problem. I'm not in oil. Here's what I thought was ironic, though. The big, giant amount of money that was paid out by BP was paid more to governments of the world than to the people whose lives were hurt. It seems, and I could be mistaken, but it seems that we've reduced human life, human existence, to a paycheck. And governments even look at opportunities like the BP crisis as a way to create a revenue stream within the government. When taxes are not enough, they've got to get more money. When people aren't employed, they're not paying taxes. And so unemployed people may be taking money out of the pot, but they're not putting any money in the pot. And the employed people, well, they don't get enough taken out of their check, apparently, to pay for the people who are not employed but are still receiving checks. And so now you've got this gap. Well, how do you fill in that gap? Well, the government's got to find other ways to get money to be able to pay those things out. They've kind of created a loop. So one of the observations that I had was we have this leadership practice, both in government and big business, that says if we do something wrong, rather than correct the wrong with the people who are hurt or correct the wrong to ensure that it never happens again, we'll just accept the big fine. One of the news articles, the New York Times, who broke the whole story on Bill O'Reilly, actually said that according to their research, the total payouts of offenses against Bill O'Reilly, the court cases that were settled out of court, the payout was about $13 million worth of settlements. This was from a New York Times article. It was published this morning. You can go back and read it for yourself. It also stated, though, that the overall ad revenue generated by Bill O'Reilly's program was closer to $178 million a year. Even if you paid that $13 million out every year, that's less than 10%. For a lot of people, the amount of money you pay out for errors, mistakes, refunds, grievances to customers who buy your widgets, for customers that you provide a service to, if your margin of error for payouts and refunds is less than 10%, you're doing pretty good. So if you look at that purely at a numbers standpoint, that process could have carried on for a long time. For a company like BP, who's making hundreds of billions of dollars a year in gross profits, paying out $4 or $5 billion in fines and fees is the cost of doing business. I'm sure they're paying more than that in fines and fees for however many days it takes them to put a screw back in the proper place, because that seems to be the way that our government funds itself. That, my friends, is not proper leadership. Simply willing to overlook an error or a mistake That's not leadership. Being willing to accept that there is a mistake, that there is an error, and that there's going to be a cost to pay for that, that's a part of the process, but that's not good leadership. That's accepting what you're doing subpar. Now, whether you're talking about economy, or you're talking about finance, or you're talking about politicians, or you're talking about education, you're talking about one-to-one relationships. When you can see that what it takes to be on par, meaning meeting the minimum standard, reaching the level that anyone else would say is a good, solid level of performance, of delivery, of relationship maintenance, when you look at that and you're willing to say, I know what par is, I know what it takes to be good, but I'm willing to settle for just a little less than that because the profit margin is higher. I'm willing to pay the fines and the fees for making mistakes. I'm willing to pay the fines and the fees because I've hurt someone else. You know, Wells Fargo, as an example, when the whole housing crisis came, they got bailout money from the government. Then they found that they had actually done some things wrong, and they paid back more than they got in the bailout. They paid back more in fines and fees. They paid back more in lawsuit settling than they got in a bailout. The fines and the fees were larger, what Wells Fargo paid to the government, than what they paid to the people that they had wounded. That's a sad reality. Again, they can look at it and go, well, it's just the cost of doing business. If there's something in your leadership practices and your leadership principle, whether it's the top level of CEO of BP, the top level CEO of Wells Fargo, the top level CEO of Fox News, the top level CEO of any other organization, if you have the ability to look at the damage done to people, the hurt to individual lives, the fines and the fees that the government will assess for you to do that, and you're willing to say, it's just a cost of doing business, it's just an expense for being in business, there's something wrong with your leadership skills because you've forgotten who you serve and why you're in business. Now let's bring that back to the individual. There are those people who operate their own small business with the same kind of mentality. That, yeah, I might get a ticket for doing it like that, or for cutting that corner, or for not having the proper insurance, or for not having the right tools, or for not being up to code. I might get in trouble for that, but the profit I can make by making that shortcut is that much higher. That attitude seems to be seeping from the top level down to the bottom level. And sometimes I'm afraid it goes the other way as well. When good leadership isn't established from the day one on the job, you see little things like I saw when I was in a restaurant the other day, and one of the hostesses dropped a menu. It fell on the floor. It's just a kid's menu, a little piece of paper, and fell on the floor right next to the hostess stand. Now this is a stained concrete floor. It's not tile, it's not carpet, so a piece of paper on that floor is like a roller skate. And it's just laying there on the floor, and 2 or 3 people, staff of that establishment, walked by and stepped over that piece of paper. One of those was the manager of that store. Walked by, stepped over the paper, looked right at it, looked back up at the hostess. I'm guessing his hope was that she would see him looking at it and notice the piece of paper. Well, she did. When he walked away, she kicked it under the counter. She didn't bend over and pick it up, she just kicked it under the counter. And I thought, that's no different than BP allowing oil to spill all along the coast and saying, well, I'll just pay the fine later. I'll take the shortcut and pay the fine later. I'll treat people unfairly and pay the fine later. If you're training your team to operate with a I'll just pay the fine later mentality, there is no limit to the amount of damage that you could do along the way. There's no question that someone's going to pay the price for that. And it may even be to you that it's not that big a deal. It's a small price to pay. If I can keep the engine running and keep generating revenue, I'll generate enough revenue that it won't matter. But see, it's the albatross of the leader that says that my profit margin is more important than my integrity. Let me add one more facet to that. Because sometimes we forget that our greatest profit, our greatest investment in our organization is also our greatest expense. and our greatest risk. See, Fox News didn't have a problem with the way they delivered the news. Fox News didn't have a problem with the quality of their cameras. Fox News didn't have a problem with their content distribution network, with getting things out there and getting them onto your TV or your telephone or however it is that you consume your news. They didn't have a problem with that mechanism. They had a problem with their news presenting in the form of a person. And in that person, actually, too, Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly, in those persons, they had an albatross. And for a season, they were willing to say, we'll put up the money, we'll pay the price, we're okay with less than par performance. We're okay with not doing it 100%. We're okay with there might be a little damage control to do in the background. We might have to pay a fine for wiping out the tourism industry for a few 100 miles of coastline. We might have to pay a fine for that. But the profit we can make in the meantime, before somebody discovers or before it comes to head, before we get caught, the fines will be minuscule by comparison to the profit we'll make in the timeline. If you're willing to have people in your life that you know eventually are going to cost you, you know eventually there's going to be a price to pay for the relationship that you've had with them. If you're willing to carry on with an inappropriate relationship, a harmful relationship, a costly relationship, and just assume that one day you'll just pay the fine and it'll be okay, then you're operating in a leadership vacuum. You're operating in a place where you're not allowing people to speak into your life and bring you to a level of awareness that you are being not only destructive to others, but self-destructive as well. And I can tell you right now, this problem happens in churches. Senior pastors whose life is off track, who aren't walking where they were supposed to be. I remember in James Robinson's book, and I should have pulled it out, but the last book that he wrote called Living Amazed, he made a powerful, powerful statement that I think a lot of people find themselves in. He said, I reached a place where the Bible became to me nothing more than a book from which to write sermons. It had no living words. It had no life to impact me. I don't care if you're a coach. I don't care if you're a pastor. I don't care if you're CEO of a company. I don't care if you're in government leadership. When you reach the place where the input that you're receiving is cut off, where you feel like you can make every decision on your own without a coach, without a mentor, without another leader in your life, speaking into your life, challenging your ideas, challenging your own integrity, you're headed down a downward spiral and a bad path. You've got to have people in your life that are willing to go, hang on, are you really willing to accept that profit at their expense? Are you willing to accept that profit at their expense? It's one thing for you to pay a check. It's one thing to have the cost of goods sold, to purchase the proper tools, to purchase the proper equipment, to hire the right people. That's a cost of business. But when your customer pays the cost of business, and I don't mean to buy your product, but because you provide an inferior product or you provide an inferior offering, or you've allowed someone cancerous to stay in your team who should have been moved on a long time ago, the price that you're going to pay isn't just going to be measured in the fines and fees to the government. It's going to be measured in someone else's life. A church that allows a pastor to stay on staff who has issues like Bill O'Reilly's is a church that is one day going to find that they have an entire group of people, families, women in their church who've been destroyed. That doesn't show up on a profit sheet. That doesn't show up on a bottom line balance sheet. How do you measure that? How do you measure the woman who's completely lost her self-esteem because of the way she's been talked to by her boss or her pastor? How do you measure that? Where does that show up in your ledger? How do you keep account of those things? You can't. It's like that one lost screw at BP, that one mortgage process that was out of line, and a group of people that were being hired to hunt down mortgages so that they could foreclose on them. Those little things that don't show up on your ledger, but they destroy people's personal lives, that's an albatross of leadership. You've got to understand that, and in leadership, your responsibility goes way beyond your profit margin. It goes way beyond your answering to the board. It goes way beyond how much stock value you personally possess. Because the impact that you're making is on an individual human basis. And that's when we begin to see that separation between profit margin and humanity. And it doesn't matter if they're male or female or transgender or gender fluid. They're human. It doesn't matter if they're white, black, Asian. It doesn't matter where they're from or who they are. They're human beings with a heart and a soul and a life and a family, and they matter. If you're in leadership and your profit, your success, the growth of your business, the growth of your church, the growth of your government, the growth of your influence, the growth of your platform is more important than the individuals that you serve, stop it. It's time for you to move on to something else or step down. If you can't see the humans whose lives you impact in the daily decisions that you make, you need some help. It is not all about bottom lines. It is not all about overall growth. It is not all about the end of the day dividends and stock reports. It's not about accepting that I will take a shortcut, I will do people wrong, I will do the process wrong, I will accept hurting people because in the end I can just pay a fine and that's actually a cost of doing business. That is not the way it's intended to work. And whether you're an Enron or an oil company that goes completely out of business, banks that have closed their doors, businesses that have closed their doors because of improprieties, because they took shortcuts in quality, because they risk other people's lives and reputations. Churches do it too. Governments do it too. The government of Greece has filed bankruptcy. Who'd have thought that could happen? I mean, when you just think through in your head, if you ever thought we would reach a point where a government would file bankruptcy? There are counties in the United States where the entire county has had to be absorbed by another county. There's a little town right here in Texas, I believe it's called Marshall Creek, that had to file bankruptcy as a city and be absorbed by another city because they mismanaged their funds, their moving in, their city planning, at the cost, at the expense of families that live there. When you lose sight of the humans that you serve in order to grow your ability to serve to a bigger platform, a better job, a higher stock price, a better dividend, you got an albatross around your neck. And the fines and the fees are only the beginning. The damage that you've done, it doesn't go away. And I promise you, it won't just simply evaporate after you pay the fines and the fees. People will remember. That's a part of your brand. And that price is coming back. I'm just saying. I hope that you'll not allow the albatross to be around your neck looking at profits higher than people. I'm J. Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.